In this episode, we're going to focus on the moment where threat intelligence either becomes a real force multiplier or becomes a document that people politely read and then ignore. Operationalizing intelligence means turning analysis into work that frontline defenders can actually use in the flow of their day, when they are triaging alerts, responding to incidents, and trying to keep systems running. For beginners, it can be tempting to think intelligence is mainly about naming threats, writing reports, and building big pictures, while defenders handle the real action. In reality, intelligence only matters if it changes what defenders watch, what they prioritize, and how they respond under pressure. That requires translation, packaging, and feedback, because defenders need intelligence that is timely, specific enough to act on, and connected to their actual controls and visibility. When you operationalize well, you shorten time to detection, reduce time to containment, and improve the quality of decisions made in the first critical moments. The goal here is to show you how to convert intelligence into frontline value without turning it into tool-specific instructions. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A practical way to start is to define what frontline defenders actually need, because their needs are different from what an analyst might enjoy producing. Frontline defenders need clarity about what to look for, what to treat as high risk, and what sequence of actions will reduce harm while preserving evidence. They also need to understand which signals are strong and which are weak, because they are constantly deciding where to spend limited time. Intelligence that is too abstract, like a description of adversary motives, may be interesting but not immediately usable. Intelligence that is too narrow, like a single indicator, may be usable but fragile if it changes quickly. Operationalized intelligence sits in the middle, providing stable behavior patterns, prioritized watch areas, and context that helps defenders triage quickly. This is where models you have learned become useful, because they give structure for turning patterns into defender guidance. The key is to treat intelligence as a product designed for a user, not as a trophy of analysis. One of the strongest ways to operationalize intelligence is to focus on behaviors that are observable in the defender's environment and map them to the points where defenders can detect or interrupt. This is why tracking tactics, techniques, and procedures is so valuable, because it describes what an adversary does, not only what they call their tools. If the intelligence suggests a focus on credential access, defenders should be guided toward monitoring authentication anomalies, privilege changes, and unusual access paths. If the intelligence suggests a pattern of rapid persistence establishment, defenders should be guided toward watching for new persistence mechanisms in contexts where they do not belong. If the intelligence suggests command and control with periodic check-ins, defenders should be guided toward recognizing regular outbound rhythms from systems that normally do not behave that way. By framing guidance around behavior and visibility, you give defenders something they can apply even when indicators rotate. This is operationalization because it produces defensive action, not just awareness. Operationalized intelligence also has to include prioritization, because defenders cannot treat every signal as an emergency. A useful intelligence product helps defenders rank what matters by connecting behaviors to likely impact and likely progression. If the activity aligns with a known pattern that quickly escalates privileges and moves laterally, then early signs of credential misuse might deserve immediate escalation. If the activity aligns with opportunistic scanning with limited follow-through, defenders might still respond, but they may not need to trigger a broad emergency posture. Prioritization becomes clearer when you connect intelligence to the kill chain view of progression, because defenders can ask where they are in the chain and what the next likely step is. Early-stage signals might lead to focused investigation, while mid-stage signals of persistence or lateral movement might justify containment steps. When intelligence includes a sense of what stage behaviors imply, defenders can decide faster and more consistently. This reduces both missed incidents and unnecessary disruption. Another important aspect is making intelligence usable under time pressure, because frontline defenders rarely have the luxury of reading long narratives during an incident. Intelligence has to be digestible without being simplistic, which means it should be structured around the decisions defenders are trying to make. Defenders often need to decide whether to escalate, whether to isolate, whether to preserve evidence before acting, and how broadly to scope searching. An operationalized product supports those decisions by providing specific, evidence-based expectations, such as typical follow-on behaviors and the kinds of systems likely to be targeted next. It also helps defenders avoid common traps, such as focusing only on malware artifacts and missing identity abuse, or blocking one infrastructure endpoint and assuming the threat is gone. The goal is to give defenders a mental shortcut that is still disciplined, where they can recognize a pattern and respond with a consistent set of next steps. This is why operationalization is a design problem as much as an analysis problem, because you are designing for real decision environments. Operationalizing intelligence also requires awareness of what telemetry defenders actually have, because guidance that assumes visibility that does not exist will not be followed or will create frustration. If defenders do not have reliable endpoint telemetry, telling them to look for detailed process behaviors may not be realistic. If authentication logs are incomplete, telling them to rely on certain patterns may lead to false reassurance. A responsible intelligence workflow includes asking what data sources exist, what retention windows are, and what correlation is possible, even if you do not name specific products. This is also where intelligence can drive improvement, because recurring inability to observe certain techniques reveals gaps that matter. If you repeatedly see incidents where persistence cannot be confirmed or lateral movement cannot be detected confidently, that is a sign that telemetry and logging need improvement in those areas. When intelligence is operationalized, it not only helps defenders act today, it helps the organization invest in the visibility needed to act better tomorrow. In this way, intelligence becomes part of security engineering, not just reporting. Feedback loops are another essential component, because intelligence cannot stay operationally useful if it is not refined by defender experience. Frontline defenders learn what signals are too noisy, which detections produce false positives, and which behaviors are difficult to distinguish from normal operations. If that feedback never reaches the intelligence function, intelligence products can drift into theory that does not match the environment. A strong operational intelligence loop collects feedback about what was useful, what was confusing, and what was missing, and then updates guidance accordingly. This also supports confidence calibration, because defenders can report whether a suspected technique was confirmed or disproven during response. Over time, the intelligence function becomes more accurate because it is grounded in real incident outcomes, and defenders become more effective because they receive refined guidance. The relationship becomes collaborative rather than one-directional, which is what you want in a mature security program. Operationalization is not a one-time delivery. It is a continuous exchange. Another critical part of operationalizing intelligence is translating it into detection and triage improvements in a way that frontline defenders can actually apply. Defenders need to know which signals should trigger high urgency, which should trigger investigation, and which should be monitored for pattern accumulation. Intelligence can support this by describing conditions that increase concern, such as multiple weak signals converging on the same host or the same user within a short time window. It can also describe the kinds of corroboration that strengthen confidence, such as authentication anomalies paired with unusual process execution or network check-ins paired with new persistence. This approach helps defenders avoid reacting to single isolated anomalies and instead react to meaningful combinations that reflect adversary behavior. It also helps reduce alert fatigue because it encourages defenders to focus on higher quality clusters rather than chasing every small signal. Operationalization, in this sense, is about improving decision quality, not just adding more data. When intelligence changes triage logic, it changes outcomes. Operational intelligence should also help defenders with scoping, because one of the hardest real-world problems is deciding how far to look and how wide to respond. Intelligence that describes typical campaign patterns can guide scoping by suggesting likely victim categories, likely lateral targets, and typical persistence patterns. If an adversary pattern often targets identity systems after initial access, scoping should include checking identity-related systems and privileged account activity, not only the initially compromised host. If an adversary pattern tends to spread through certain shared services, Scoping should include those services even if no direct alert has fired yet. This is where the diamond model of intrusion analysis, DMIA, becomes a practical tool because it encourages defenders to consider victim relationships and infrastructure linkages rather than treating the incident as isolated. When intelligence includes scoping guidance, defenders can avoid the two extremes of either looking too narrowly and missing spread or looking too broadly and wasting time. Good scoping guidance is a balance that reflects observed adversary behavior. Operationalizing intelligence also means helping defenders understand how adversaries respond to defensive pressure, because defenders often act and then wonder what to watch for next. If intelligence suggests that an adversary typically rotates infrastructure quickly after blocks, defenders should monitor for new outbound destinations with similar rhythm rather than assuming blocks are final. If intelligence suggests the adversary uses multiple credentials and returns after resets, defenders should watch for follow-on login attempts and suspicious privilege activity soon after identity disruption. If intelligence suggests the adversary tends to accelerate actions on objectives when challenged, defenders may need to prioritize protection of sensitive data and critical services immediately after containment begins. These expectations are valuable because they let defenders treat their own actions as part of an interaction, not a one-sided cleanup. The timeline and cadence work you have learned becomes essential here, because cadence reveals how the adversary behaves when pressured. Operational intelligence that includes expected adversary reactions helps defenders stay ahead rather than being surprised by the next move. Another often overlooked element is making intelligence usable across shifts and across people, because frontline defense work is a relay, not a solo effort. If intelligence is shared in a way that depends on one person's memory, it will degrade, and the same mistakes will repeat. Operationalization, therefore, includes creating shared understanding, where defenders have a consistent mental model of the threat pattern and a consistent way to communicate what they see. When a defender says they see behavior consistent with a credential-focused phase, others should understand what that implies and what to check next. This shared vocabulary reduces handoff friction and reduces the risk that an incident stalls during shift changes. It also helps newer defenders learn faster because they are guided by a pattern language rather than a pile of unrelated alerts. The intelligence function contributes by keeping that vocabulary grounded in evidence and updated based on feedback. Operational intelligence becomes part of the team's shared muscle memory. As we wrap up, operationalizing intelligence for frontline defenders is about converting analysis into practical guidance that fits the reality of defender work. You focus on observable behaviors, prioritize signals based on likely impact and progression, and package guidance around the decisions defenders must make under time pressure. You ensure the guidance aligns with actual telemetry and visibility, using gaps as a roadmap for improvement rather than pretending they do not exist. You build feedback loops so intelligence stays grounded in incident outcomes and defender experience, and you use intelligence to improve detection, triage, and scoping rather than only to inform reports. You also incorporate expectations about adversary adaptation so defenders know what to watch for after applying pressure. When this is done well, intelligence stops being a separate discipline and becomes a practical engine that improves everyday defense, making responders faster, investigations sharper, and outcomes better even when the adversary changes tools and infrastructure.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.